Sometimes life leaves you with no choice but to take what's offered, even when everyone tells you it's cursed. Arizona Harris was 3 days from sleeping in her car with her daughter Sophia when she accidentally bid on a mansion at a county auction. The entire town warned her to stay away from the 120-year-old house. They said it was haunted by the secret society that vanished there decades ago. But Arizona had nowhere else to go. The moment they moved in, the house began to show its secrets. Doors slammed shut, whispers filled empty rooms. Sophia saw people in the shadows. Then Arizona found the hidden ledger in the cellar that revealed the mansion's deadly truth. The previous owners had left behind evidence of a fortune and an unfinished mission that powerful people would kill to protect. Now strangers watch the house at night, and Arizona realizes the same forces that made the original owners disappear are coming for her family. What secret could be worth killing to keep buried for over a century? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Arizona Harris had always been proud of her independence. At 32, she'd built a life for herself and her daughter Sophia that wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The small apartment on Elm Street might have had thin walls and a leaky faucet, but it was home, or at least it had been, until the factory closed and took her job with it. The eviction notice had arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and official, like a death sentence typed in 12-point font. "Final notice of eviction," it declared in bold letters that seemed to mock her from the kitchen table where she'd left it 3 days ago. 60 days to vacate. 60 days to find a miracle. "Mama, are we really going to live in the car?" Sophia asked from her perch at the kitchen counter, her legs swinging as she worked on her homework. At 8 years old, she had Arizona's dark eyes and serious expression, but with an innocence that Arizona fought fiercely to preserve. "No, baby girl. We're not living in any car." Arizona forced a smile as she stirred the mac and cheese on the stove. It was their 3rd box this week, but Sophia didn't complain. She never complained, which somehow made everything harder. The knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Arizona peered through the peephole to see Mrs. Martinez, the landlord's wife, shifting uncomfortably on the doormat. "Arizona, I'm sorry to bother you," Mrs. Martinez began when Arizona opened the door. Her kind face was creased with worry. "But Mr. Martinez, he says you haven't returned his calls about the lease renewal." Arizona's chest tightened. "I know, I'm working on it. I just need a little more time. He's already shown the apartment to 3 families this week." Mrs. Martinez lowered her voice. "One of them put down a deposit. I tried to tell him to wait, but how long do I have? End of the month. I'm so sorry, mija. If there was anything I could do—" Arizona nodded, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. "Thank you for telling me." After Mrs. Martinez left, Arizona sank onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. The weight of single motherhood had never felt heavier. No family to call. Her parents had made their disapproval of her choices clear when Sophia's father disappeared. No savings account worth mentioning. No job prospects that paid enough to cover rent, utilities, food, and childcare. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diana Ross, her neighbor from across the hall. Despite sharing a name with the legendary singer, this Diana was a soft-spoken woman in her 60s who'd taken Arizona and Sophia under her wing when they first moved in. County auction tomorrow at 10 a.m. Lots of furniture and household items. Might find some bargains for the new place? Arizona stared at the message. What new place? But Diana didn't know how dire things had become. Arizona had been too proud to admit just how close to the edge they were dancing. The next morning, Arizona left Sophia with Diana and drove to the county courthouse. The auction was being held on the front steps, with folding tables displaying everything from antique dresses to kitchen appliances. Maybe she could find some cheap furniture for whatever studio apartment she might eventually afford. The auctioneer, a weathered man in his 70s, called out lot numbers with practiced efficiency. Arizona bid on a few small items, a lamp for $3, a set of dishes for $5. Nothing that would break what was left of her budget. Then the auctioneer announced Lot 47. the Blackwood Mansion and accompanying 37 acres on Hillcrest Road. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Arizona looked up from the box of kitchen utensils she'd been examining. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking the town, a Victorian Gothic structure that had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. Even from a distance, it looked like something from a ghost story. Now, folks, I'm required to inform you that this property is being sold as is, with no warranties or guarantees. The structure has been vacant for over 2 decades and will require significant renovation. Arizona tuned out the disclaimer and returned her attention to the kitchen items. The mansion was probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, even in its current condition. She was here for $10 lamps, not fairy tale castles. Do I hear an opening bid of $50,000? Silence. 40,000. More silence. Arizona glanced up to see the auctioneer looking increasingly uncomfortable. 25,000. A man in the back coughed. The auctioneer's eyes darted hopefully in his direction, but the man shook his head. 15,000. Arizona found herself feeling sorry for the auctioneer. Whatever was wrong with that house, it was clearly worse than he'd anticipated. 10,000. A woman near the front shifted in her seat, and Arizona thought she might bid, but she remained silent. 5,000. The desperation in the auctioneer's voice was palpable now. Arizona looked around at the faces in the crowd. They all seemed to know something she didn't, some local knowledge that kept them from raising their hands. $1,000. Arizona's heart did something funny in her chest. $1,000. She had exactly valu 247 in her checking account, her last paycheck, and the security deposit return from her previous apartment. $1,000 for 37 acres and a mansion. She knew it was crazy. She knew there had to be something seriously wrong with the property. But as she sat there, holding a $5 lamp and facing homelessness, crazy started to look like her only option. The auctioneer was scanning the crowd desperately. $1,000 for the Blackwood property. Going once. Arizona raised her hand. The auctioneer's face lit up with relief and surprise. We have 1,000. Do I hear 1,100? Silence fell over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Arizona felt every eye turn to her, and the expression she saw ranged from pity to disbelief to something that looked almost like fear. Going once at $1,000. The auctioneer's voice carried across the courthouse steps. Going twice. Wait, called a voice from the back. An elderly man in a worn flannel shirt pushed through the crowd. Miss, you don't understand. That house, it's not safe. No one's lived there since. Sold. The auctioneer's gavel came down with finality. To the lady in the blue jacket for $1,000. Arizona stared at the wooden gavel in the auctioneer's hand, a simple tool that had just changed everything. The sound of it hitting the podium seemed to echo in her chest, binding her to a decision she wasn't sure she understood. The elderly man reached her side, his weathered face creased with concern. Miss, I'm Earl Patterson. I've lived in this town all my life, and I'm telling you, you need to reconsider this purchase. That house has been empty for good reason. What kind of reason? Arizona asked, though part of her didn't want to know. The Blackwood family, they disappeared one night in 1903, every last one of them and their guests. Police never found so much as a drop of blood, but they never came back either. Since then, everyone who's tried to live there, he shook his head. Well, let's just say they don't stay long. Arizona felt a chill run down her spine. But she thought about Sophia waiting at Diana's apartment, about the eviction notice on her kitchen table, about sleeping in her car with an 8-year-old who deserved so much better. Mr. Patterson, I appreciate the warning, but sometimes a person doesn't have the luxury of choosing the safe option. She walked to the payment table, wrote out a check for $1,000, and became the owner of a mansion that an entire town seemed to fear. 2 hours later, she stood in Diana's doorway with a deed in her hand, a news that would sound insane to anyone with better options. You bought what? Diana stared at the legal document as if it might catch fire. The Blackwood Mansion. For $1,000. Arizona, honey. Diana's voice carried the same tone Earl Patterson had used, gentle but urgent. You can't be serious about living there. It's got a roof and walls. That's more than I'll have next week. Sophia looked up from her coloring book. Are we moving to a mansion, Mama? Like a princess. Arizona knelt beside her daughter, brushing a curl from Sophia's forehead. We're moving to a big old house that needs some work. It'll be an adventure, but as she looked into Sophia's trusting eyes, Arizona wondered what kind of adventure she'd just committed them to. The deed in her hand felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the weight of more than just property ownership. That evening, Arizona drove alone to see their new home. The mansion sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by overgrown gardens and ancient oak trees that seemed to lean in toward the structure like conspirators sharing secrets. The house itself was a study in faded grandeur, 3 stories of Victorian architecture with elaborate gingerbread trim, wraparound porches, and dozens of windows that caught the setting sun like watching eyes. Even in the growing dusk, Arizona could see that the house was in better condition than she'd expected. The roof appeared intact, the foundations solid. Paint was peeling and some shutters hung at odd angles, but these were cosmetic issues. With some work, it could be beautiful again. As she sat in her car, engine running, Arizona felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe Earl Patterson and the others were wrong. Maybe the house's reputation was just small-town superstition. Maybe she and Sophia could build something wonderful here, away from judgment and prying eyes. A movement in one of the upper windows caught her attention. She peered through the gathering darkness but saw nothing. A trick of the light, perhaps, or a bird that had found its way inside. Arizona put the car in reverse and headed back to town. Tomorrow, she and Sophia would move into their mansion. Tonight, she would try not to think about why it had sold for the price of a used car. The moving truck was actually Diana's nephew's pickup, and their belongings fit in the bed with room to spare. Arizona had sold most of their furniture to pay for utilities deposits, keeping only the essentials and Sophia's toys. As they drove up the winding road to the mansion, Sophia pressed her nose against the passenger window. "It's like a castle, Mama." Arizona had to admit the house looked less ominous in the morning sunlight. The Victorian architecture was stunning, with intricate woodwork and stained glass windows that threw rainbow patterns across the wraparound porch. The gardens, though overgrown, showed signs of having once been magnificent. "Remember what we talked about," Arizona said as she parked near the front steps. "This house is old, so some things might not work perfectly right away. And if you see or hear anything that seems strange, you tell me immediately." Sophia nodded solemnly, then bounded out of the car toward the ornate front door. Arizona followed more cautiously, fishing the heavy brass key from her purse. The door opened with surprising ease, revealing a grand foyer with a crystal chandelier and a sweeping staircase that curved up to the second floor. "Wow," Sophia breathed, her voice echoing in the space. The house was fully furnished, frozen in time like a museum exhibit. Heavy velvet drapes covered most of the windows, casting everything in a golden twilight. Persian rugs decorated hardwood floors that gleamed despite decades of neglect. Oil paintings in gilded frames watched from the walls, their subjects stern-faced and formally dressed. Arizona walked through the rooms with growing amazement. The dining room table was set for 12, with fine china and crystal glasses, as if guests were expected momentarily. The library contained hundreds of leather-bound books, and the parlor featured a grand piano with sheet music still open on the stand. "Mama, look!" Sophia called from the kitchen. She stood before a massive cast-iron stove, perfect for someone half her size. "They have a toy kitchen." "That's a real stove, baby girl." "Just an old one." Arizona ran her fingers along the smooth surface of a marble-topped preparation island. The kitchen was surprisingly modern for a house built in the 1800s, with indoor plumbing and gas fixtures that had probably been cutting-edge technology at the time. They spent the morning exploring, and with each room, Arizona's confidence grew. The house was quirky but solid. The plumbing worked, most of the electrical fixtures functioned, and there was even a working telephone in the front hall. Whatever had scared away potential buyers seemed to be nothing more than small-town folklore. After lunch, Arizona set up Sophia's bed in a bright corner room on the second floor, while Sophia arranged her stuffed animals on the window seat. The afternoon sun streamed through lace curtains, making dust motes dance in the air like tiny spirits. "I like it here," Sophia announced, hugging her favorite teddy bear. "It feels friendly," Arizona smiled, adjusting the curtains to let in more light. "I'm glad, sweetheart. This is our fresh start." That evening, as they shared a simple dinner of soup and sandwiches at the enormous dining table, Arizona felt something she hadn't experienced since losing her job: peace. The house settled around them with the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood, but nothing seemed threatening. After dinner, Sophia wanted to draw, so Arizona set her up at the kitchen table with crayons and paper while she unpacked boxes in the parlor. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the scratch of Sophia's crayons and the distant sound of wind in the oak trees outside. "Mama, come look at my picture." Arizona walked to the kitchen to find Sophia holding up a drawing of their new home. She'd captured the mansion's distinctive architecture with surprising accuracy for an 8-year-old, complete with the wraparound porch and Gothic windows. "That's beautiful, honey. You're getting so good at drawing. Miss Margaret helped me remember the details," Sophia said matter-of-factly, returning to her coloring. Arizona's blood chilled. "Who's Miss Margaret?" "The lady in the white dress. She lives here too." Sophia didn't look up from her drawing. "She's very nice. She said she's been waiting for us." "Sophia." Arizona knelt beside her daughter's chair, trying to keep her voice calm. "There's no one else in this house. It's just you and me. She's right there, Mama." Sophia pointed toward the kitchen doorway. "She's waving at you." Arizona turned to look at the empty doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Sweetie, I don't see anyone. She says you can't see her yet because you don't believe. But she's real. She showed me where the secret room is." "What secret room?" Before Sophia could answer, every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. The sound echoed through the mansion like gunshots, followed by silence so complete it seemed to press against Arizona's eardrums. Arizona pulled Sophia against her, scanning the kitchen for threats. The back door was closed, though she was certain she'd left it open for the evening breeze. The pantry door was shut tight, and she could hear other doors throughout the house settling into their frames with soft clicks. "It's okay. Mama?" Sophia said, her voice muffled against Arizona's shoulder. "Miss Margaret was just saying hello. She doesn't want to scare us," but Arizona was scared. Terrified, actually. Her rational mind searched for explanations. Wind pressure, old hinges, settling foundation, but none of them could account for every door in the house closing at exactly the same moment. "We're going upstairs," Arizona said, scooping Sophia into her arms. "Right now." As they hurried through the foyer toward the staircase, Arizona caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. She turned toward the parlor doorway and saw nothing, but the air seemed to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. In Sophia's bedroom, Arizona checked the windows, all locked, and looked under the bed and in the closet. Everything was exactly as they'd left it. She tucked Sophia under the covers and sat on the edge of the bed. "Tell me about Miss Margaret," she said, trying to sound casual. "She's pretty, with long, dark hair." "She wears a white dress with lots of buttons." Sophia's eyes were already growing heavy. "She said she used to live here with lots of friends, but they had to go away. She stayed to watch over the house." "Did she say anything else?" "She said bad men wanted to hurt her friends, but they hid something important before they left. She's been waiting for someone brave enough to help her finish what they started." Arizona's mouth went dry. "What kind of something important?" But Sophia had fallen asleep, her breathing deep and even. Arizona sat watching her daughter's peaceful face, trying to make sense of what had happened. Children had active imaginations. Old houses made strange sounds. There had to be a logical explanation for everything. She was almost convinced when she heard the piano playing downstairs. The melody was soft and melancholy, drifting up through the floorboards like a lullaby. Arizona recognized it as a classical piece, something that might have been popular a century ago. The playing was skilled, with subtle emotional nuances that spoke of years of training. Arizona crept to the bedroom door and peered into the hallway. The piano music continued, beautiful and impossible. She could see the top of the staircase, and faint light emanated from the parlor below. Every instinct told her to lock the bedroom door and wait until morning. But she was a mother, and this was her home now. She needed to know what was happening in her house. Moving as quietly as possible, Arizona descended the stairs. The music grew clearer with each step, definitely coming from the parlor piano. As she reached the bottom of the staircase, the playing stopped abruptly. Arizona peered around the doorframe into the parlor. The room was empty, but the piano bench was pulled out and the sheet music had been turned to a different page. A piece titled Margaret's Waltz in elegant handwriting across the top. She stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. The piano keys were still warm to the touch. "Hello," she whispered, feeling foolish but needing to try. "Is someone there?" The air in front of the piano shimmered again, like looking through water, and for just a moment Arizona thought she saw the outline of a woman in white. Then it was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of jasmine and the certainty that her life had just taken another impossible turn. Arizona sat heavily in a velvet armchair, staring at the piano. Either she was losing her mind, or she and Sophia had moved into a house with a very real ghost. Given everything that had led them here, she wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. Arizona barely slept that first night. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind through the eaves, sent her heart racing. But morning brought sunlight streaming through the lace curtains and the sound of Sophia humming downstairs. And in the bright light of day, the previous evening's events seemed less sinister. Maybe she'd been more stressed than she'd realized. Maybe the piano bench had always been pulled out and she simply hadn't noticed. Maybe the sheet music had been turned to that page all along. She found Sophia in the kitchen, sitting at the massive oak table with a bowl of cereal and another drawing. "Morning, baby girl. What are you working on?" "Miss Margaret asked me to draw her friends," Sophia said, holding up a crayon portrait of several people in old-fashioned clothing. "She says they were very brave people who helped others." Arizona studied the drawing. Sophia had rendered the figures with unusual detail for a child her age. Their period clothing was accurate, their faces distinct and individual. One woman in the center wore a white dress with many buttons, exactly as Sophia had described Margaret. "Honey, we need to talk about Miss Margaret." "She's not imaginary, Mama. She's as real as you are. She just lives in a different way now." The matter-of-fact certainty in Sophia's voice was unsettling. Arizona had always encouraged her daughter's imagination, but this felt different, more intense, more real. "I'm going to go to the library today to learn about our house," Arizona said carefully. "Would you like to come with me?" "Miss Margaret says that's a good idea. She says Mr. Joey at the library knows lots of stories about the old days." Arizona paused, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "How do you know Mr. Joey's name?" "Miss Margaret told me. She says he's been trying to tell people the true story for years, but nobody listens." After breakfast, Arizona drove into town with Sophia beside her, pointing out landmarks that she somehow knew, despite having lived in the area for less than 24 hours. The public library was a modest brick building across from the courthouse, and the librarian behind the front desk was indeed a man wearing a name tag that read, Joey. He was younger than Arizona had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of gentle demeanor that suggested he'd found his calling in books rather than people. "Can I help you find something?" he asked as Arizona approached the reference desk. "I'm hoping to research the history of a local property." The Blackwood Mansion on Hillcrest Road. Joey's expression shifted from helpful to concerned. "You're not thinking of buying that place, are you?" "Actually, I already did. We moved in yesterday." Joey stared at her for a long moment, then glanced at Sophia, who was happily exploring the children's section. "You're serious? You're actually living there? Is there some reason I shouldn't be?" Come with me, Joey said, leading her toward the local history section. There are some things you need to know. He pulled out a thick file folder marked Blackwood Property and spread its contents across a reading table. Newspaper clippings, old photographs, and handwritten documents created a timeline of tragedy and mystery. The Blackwood family built that house in 1881, Joey began, his voice low. Richard Blackwood was a successful businessman, but more importantly, he was an abolitionist. The house served as a station on the Underground Railroad. Arizona studied a photograph of the mansion in its prime, surrounded by formal gardens and filled with well-dressed people. It must have been beautiful then. It was. But in 1903, something happened. The entire Blackwood Society, that's what they called themselves, vanished without a trace. 23 people, including children, just disappeared overnight. Joey showed her a newspaper clipping from October 15th, 1903. The headline read, "Local family and guests missing. Police baffled. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of where they might have gone. The dinner table was still set, beds were turned down for the night, but everyone was gone. What do you think happened to them?" Joey hesitated, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. Officially, the police report suggests they might have been warned of some danger and fled together. But there are rumors. What kind of rumors? That they were murdered by a group opposed to their Underground Railroad activities. That their bodies were hidden and their spirits remained in the house to guard whatever they died protecting. Arizona felt a chill run down her spine. And you believe that? I believe something unusual happened in that house. Every family that's tried to live there since has left within weeks. They report strange sounds, objects moving on their own, voices in empty rooms. Mama! Sophia appeared at Arizona's elbow, holding a children's book about local history. Look, it's our house. The book was open to a page featuring a photograph of the Blackwood Mansion, surrounded by text about the Underground Railroad. But what caught Arizona's attention was Sophia's matter-of-fact recognition of people and places she'd never seen before. "That's Miss Margaret," Sophia said, pointing to a woman in a white dress standing on the mansion's front porch. "And that's Mr. Richard and Mrs. Eleanor. Miss Margaret says they were like grandparents to everyone." Joey stared at Sophia, then at Arizona. "How does she know their names?" "She says she talks to them," Arizona admitted reluctantly. "All of them?" "Just Margaret, as far as I can tell. At least, that's the only one she's mentioned." Joey was quiet for a long moment, studying the photograph. Finally, he looked up at Arizona with an expression that mixed excitement and concern. Margaret Blackwood was Richard's sister. She never married, dedicated her life to helping escaped slaves reach freedom. According to the records, she was the heart of the Underground Railroad operation. Was she wearing a white dress when she disappeared? "I don't know about that night specifically, but white was her signature color. She always wore white dresses with pearl buttons. The town ladies used to say she looked like an angel." Arizona's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the documents. "Mr. Joey, just Joey, please. Joey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you think my daughter and I are in danger in that house?" Joey considered the question carefully. "I don't think Margaret Blackwood would hurt anyone, especially not a child. If half the stories about her are true, she spent her life protecting people. But what? But 23 people died to keep whatever secret is hidden in that house. And if Sophia is really communicating with Margaret, it might mean that secret is about to come to light." That evening, as Arizona tucked Sophia into bed, she found a small silver locket on the nightstand that hadn't been there that morning. "Where did this come from?" she asked, holding up the tarnished jewelry. "Miss Margaret left it for me. She says it has a picture of her family inside, and now we're part of her family too." Arizona opened the locket with shaking fingers. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman in a white dress, standing among a group of people in 1900s clothing. The woman's face was kind but determined, with eyes that seemed to look directly at Arizona across more than a century. On the back of the locket, in delicate script, were the words, "For courage in dark times." MB Arizona stared at the inscription, her heart pounding. Either her daughter had discovered a valuable historical artifact somewhere in the house, or Margaret Blackwood had indeed left it for them. Neither possibility offered much comfort. The next morning, Arizona returned to the library alone, while Sophia played at Diana's apartment. Joey had promised to help her access the restricted historical archives, documents that weren't available to the general public. Most of these papers were donated by the families of local historical society members, Joey explained as he led her into a climate-controlled back room lined with filing cabinets. Some of them didn't want certain information made public, but they didn't want it lost either. He pulled out a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age. This is the membership roll of the Blackwood Society. It's not just a list of names. It includes meeting notes, financial records, and coded references to Underground Railroad activities. Arizona opened the book carefully, scanning the elegant handwriting. The names were familiar from cemetery headstones and street signs around town. The founding families whose descendants still lived in the area. Walker, Patterson, Morrison, Jenkins, she read aloud. These are some of the most prominent families in town. Were, Joey corrected. Most of these bloodlines died out or moved away after 1903, but a few descendants remain, and they've never been comfortable with their ancestors' connection to the Blackwood Society. Why not? Helping enslaved people escape was honorable work. It was also dangerous and illegal at the time. These families built their reputations on being respectable, law-abiding citizens. Having abolitionists in the family tree was embarrassing. Arizona turned the pages, studying the careful records. The society had been remarkably organized, tracking safe houses, documenting successful escapes, and maintaining detailed financial accounts. But as she neared the end of the ledger, the handwriting became more urgent, the entries more cryptic. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an entry dated October 10th, 1903. They were planning something big. "Final transport scheduled for autumn moon. All preparations must be complete by the 14th. 5 days before they disappeared," Joey noted. Arizona continued reading. "Listen to this. Word has reached us that our activities have been discovered. We may be forced to implement the emergency protocol. May God protect the sacred cargo and guide future guardians to complete our mission." Sacred cargo, Joey repeated thoughtfully. That's not their usual terminology for helping people escape. Arizona studied the final entry, dated October 13th, 1903. "They come tonight. M has hidden the evidence with the others. If we do not survive, may those who follow prove worthy of the trust." "Some has to be Margaret," Arizona said, "and the others might refer to the other Underground Railroad stations." But what evidence? Their research was interrupted by Arizona's cell phone ringing. Diana's name appeared on the screen, and her voice was tense with worry when Arizona answered. "You need to come get Sophia right away." "What's wrong? Is she hurt?" "She's fine physically, but Arizona, she's scaring the other children. She keeps talking about things that happened in this building 60 years ago, things she couldn't possibly know. And she's been sleepwalking. I found her in my kitchen this morning at 5 a.m., trying to unlock the door to the basement." Arizona's blood ran cold. "I'll be right there." She found Sophia sitting quietly in Diana's living room, drawing another detailed picture of people in period clothing. But this drawing was different, darker. The figures looked frightened, huddled together as shadowy forms approached from the edges of the paper. "Baby girl. Diana says you've been having trouble sleeping." "I'm not having trouble," Sophia said without looking up from her drawing. "Miss Margaret has been showing me things. Important things about what happened to her friends." "What kind of things?" Sophia finally looked up, and Arizona was struck by how mature her daughter's eyes seemed. "Bad men came to hurt the people Miss Margaret was helping. But she was smart. She hid the proof of what the bad men did, so someday someone could make them pay for their crimes." "Sophia, that was over 100 years ago. The bad men are long dead. The bad men, yes, but their families aren't, and they're still doing bad things." Sophia returned to her drawing. "Miss Margaret says that's why she's been waiting. She needs someone brave to help finish what she started. That evening, Arizona installed new locks on all the doors and windows, despite their antiquated hardware. She also set up a baby monitor in Sophia's room and another in the hallway, hoping to catch any sounds that might explain her daughter's nighttime wanderings. Around midnight, the monitor crackled to life with the sound of Sophia's voice, though she seemed to be responding to someone Arizona couldn't hear. "Yes, Miss Margaret. I understand, but Mama might be scared." Arizona crept to Sophia's door and peered inside. Her daughter was sitting on the window seat, apparently having a conversation with empty air. Moonlight streamed through the lace curtains, creating shifting patterns on the floor. "She says the truth is hidden with the Underground Railroad map," Sophia continued, "behind the loose brick in the cellar wall. But we have to be careful, because the Watchers are coming back." Arizona's heart hammered against her ribs. "Watchers? What Watchers?" "I'll tell her in the morning," Sophia said. "But Miss Margaret, what if the bad men's families try to hurt us too?" Arizona couldn't hear the response, but Sophia nodded solemnly and returned to her bed. Within minutes, her breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of sleep. The next morning brought an unwelcome visitor. Arizona was making breakfast when a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A woman in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a briefcase, and wearing the sort of professional smile that never reached the eyes. "Ms. Harris, I'm Rachel Morrison from Children and Family Services. I've received some concerns about your daughter's welfare." Arizona's stomach dropped. "Concerns? What kind of concerns? May I come in?" "I'd prefer to discuss this privately." Arizona had no choice but to invite her in. Rachel's gaze swept over the mansion's grand foyer with undisguised surprise. "This is certainly an unusual living situation for someone of your financial circumstances," Rachel observed. "How exactly did you come to own this property?" Arizona explained the county auction, keeping her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. Rachel made notes in a leather portfolio, her expression neutral but calculating. "I see. And you're comfortable raising a child in a house with such a troubled history?" "What troubled history?" "Come now, Ms. Harris. Everyone in town knows about the Blackwood Mansion, the previous owner's mysterious disappearance, the reports of paranormal activity." Rachel's smile was cold. "Surely you researched the property before making such a significant purchase." "The house is structurally sound and fully furnished. My daughter and I are safe here. Are you?" "Because I've received reports that Sophia has been exhibiting disturbing behavior. Talking to imaginary friends, demonstrating knowledge of historical events she couldn't possibly know, sleepwalking." "Who reported this?" Rachel consulted her notes. "I'm not at liberty to reveal my sources, but the concerns are serious enough to warrant an investigation." At that moment, Sophia appeared at the top of the staircase, still in her pajamas. "Mama, who is the angry lady?" "Go back to your room, sweetheart. I'll be up in a minute." But Sophia was staring at Rachel with an intensity that made Arizona uncomfortable. "Miss Margaret says you have the same last name as one of the bad men's families. She says your great-great-grandfather was one of the ones who hurt her friends." Rachel's professional composure slipped for just a moment, and Arizona caught a flash of something that looked like fear. "Sophia, and go upstairs now," Arizona said firmly. As her daughter disappeared down the hallway, Arizona turned back to Rachel. "She has an active imagination." "Indeed." Rachel closed her portfolio. "Ms. Harris, I'll be conducting a full investigation into Sophia's living conditions and emotional state. This will include interviews with neighbors, school officials, and medical professionals. I strongly suggest you consider alternative housing arrangements. Are you threatening to take my daughter away?" "I'm suggesting that a responsible mother would prioritize her child's psychological well-being over her own housing needs." After Rachel left, Arizona found an envelope that had been slipped under the front door while they were talking. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message in block letters: "Leave now, before it's too late." Arizona crumpled the note, her hands shaking with anger more than fear. She'd spent her life being pushed around by people who thought they knew what was best for her and Sophia. First her parents, then Sophia's father. then landlords and employers and social workers who saw only a struggling single mother instead of a woman fighting to build a better life. She walked to the cellar door, which she'd been avoiding since moving in. If there really was something hidden behind a loose brick in the cellar wall, she was going to find it. If Margaret Blackwood had left evidence of century-old crimes, Arizona was going to uncover the truth. The cellar was dark and musty, filled with the detritus of decades, old furniture, crates of books, abandoned household items. But as Arizona examined the stone walls by flashlight, she found what she was looking for, one brick that sat slightly proud of the others, its mortar crumbling with age. She worked the brick loose with a kitchen knife, and behind it was a cavity containing an oilcloth-wrapped package. Inside were documents, letters, photographs, and a map hand-drawn on parchment. The map showed the Underground Railroad route through their area, with the Blackwood mansion clearly marked as a central station. But more importantly, it showed connections to other properties, including several that Arizona now recognized as belonging to the town's founding families. The letters were even more revealing. They documented payments made to local officials, agreements to look the other way during transport operations, and most damning of all, records of bribes paid to ensure the safe passage of escaped slaves. But the final letter made Arizona's blood run cold. Dated October 13, 1903, it was written in Margaret Blackwood's careful handwriting. To whoever finds this record, the families of Morrison, Patterson, and Jenkins have betrayed us to the slave catchers. They have taken money to reveal our routes and schedules. Tonight, they come with armed men to silence us forever and destroy all evidence of their complicity. I have hidden these documents to ensure that someday justice might be served. The truth must not die with us. Margaret Blackwood, Arizona stared at the letter, understanding finally dawning. Rachel Morrison wasn't just a social worker conducting a routine investigation. She was a descendant of one of the families that had betrayed the Underground Railroad, and she was trying to drive Arizona away before the truth could come to light. The watchers Sophia had mentioned weren't ghosts. They were very much alive, and they had been waiting over a century to make sure their ancestors' crimes remained buried with the Blackwood Society. Arizona carefully rewrapped the documents and returned them to their hiding place. She had found Margaret's evidence, but now she had to figure out what to do with it. One thing was certain: she wasn't leaving. Not when she finally understood why Margaret had been waiting, and why she and Sophia had been chosen to finish what the Blackwood Society had started. Arizona spent the next morning at the kitchen table, studying photocopies of the documents she'd found, while Sophia played in the garden. The evidence was damning, but it was also over a century old. What good would exposing historical corruption do now? The answer came from an unexpected source. Sophia burst through the back door, her cheeks flushed with excitement and her hands dirty from digging in the garden. "Mama!" Miss Margaret showed me another secret place. Arizona looked up from the papers. "What kind of secret place?" "Behind the pantry!" "There's a hidden room where they used to hide people who were running away from bad men. Miss Margaret says you need to see it." Intrigued despite her skepticism, Arizona followed Sophia to the kitchen pantry. It was a walk-in closet lined with shelves, nothing that seemed unusual. But Sophia pressed against the back wall, and Arizona heard a soft click. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. "How did you know about this?" "Miss Margaret showed me. She says there are lots of secret places in our house because it was dangerous work, helping people escape." Arizona squeezed through the opening and found herself in a small, windowless room barely large enough for 4 people to sit comfortably. The walls were lined with shelves containing blankets, clothing, and preserved food, supplies for refugees who might need to hide for days or weeks. But what caught her attention were the items that clearly didn't belong to the Underground Railroad era. Modern camping equipment, sleeping bags, and a stack of manila folders secured with rubber bands. Arizona opened one of the folders and gasped. Inside were photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings, all related to human trafficking operations in the modern era. The dates ranged from the 1980s to just last year. "What is this?" she whispered, flipping through evidence of crimes that echoed the very injustices the Blackwood Society had fought against. Maps showed routes that overlapped with the historic Underground Railroad paths. Financial records documented payments to local officials, some of whom shared names with the families Margaret had accused of betrayal in 1903. Most chilling of all were photographs of vulnerable people who had disappeared without a trace, their faces haunting reminders that the fight for human freedom was far from over. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note. The routes never changed, only the cargo. Duh! Arizona's hands trembled as she realized the implications. Someone had been using the Blackwood Mansion's hidden passages and Underground Railroad connections for modern trafficking operations. And the initials, DR, could only mean one thing: Diana Ross, her kind neighbor, the woman who had watched Sophia and offered comfort during their transition, was involved in something monstrous. Arizona gathered the folders and squeezed back through the passage, her mind racing. She needed help, but who could she trust? Rachel Morrison was clearly compromised, and now she suspected Diana as well. That left Joey. She called him from the kitchen phone, keeping her voice low. "Can you meet me at the library? I found something important." "Of course." "Are you all right? You sound upset." "I'm fine, but this can't wait." An hour later, Arizona sat across from Joey in the library's back room, the modern trafficking files spread between them. His face had gone pale as he absorbed the contents. "This is impossible," he said, studying a recent photograph of the mansion. "Diana Ross has lived in town her entire life. She volunteers at the church, helps with community events. Look at the signatures on these financial documents." Joey examined the papers more closely. "D. Ross, P. Morrison, E. Patterson." He looked up at Arizona with horror. "These are all local families. People I know. People whose ancestors betrayed the Underground Railroad in 1903. It's not a coincidence. Joey, they're using the same routes, the same corruption networks, probably even the same hiding places. But why would they leave evidence in your house?" Arizona had been wondering the same thing. "I think they were using the mansion as a storage and processing center. The house has been empty for decades, and everyone in town was too superstitious to go near it. It would have been perfect until you accidentally bought it." "Exactly. That's why Rachel Morrison showed up with threats about taking Sophia. That's why I got the anonymous warning note. They need me gone so they can reclaim their operation." Joey leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. "What are we going to do? If these people are as dangerous as this evidence suggests, we're going to expose them. But we need more proof, and we need allies we can trust." That evening, Arizona made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. She was going to ask Margaret Blackwood for help. She waited until Sophia was asleep, then made her way to the parlor, where she'd first heard the piano playing. The room was quiet, but Arizona could sense a presence, like the feeling of being watched in an empty house. "Margaret," she said softly, feeling foolish but determined. "If you're here, I need to talk to you." The air shimmered near the piano bench, and gradually a figure began to take shape. Not solid, but visible. A woman in a white dress with pearl buttons. Her dark hair pinned back in the style of the early 1900s. Her face was kind but grave, and her eyes held the weight of more than a century of waiting. "You found the evidence," Margaret said, her voice like a whisper carried on the wind. "Both sets. The historical documents and the modern ones. Then you understand why I could not rest. The same families that betrayed us continue their evil work, using the very routes we created to save lives for the purpose of destroying them." Arizona stepped closer, no longer afraid. "What happened to your society the night you disappeared?" Margaret's expression grew sad. "We knew they were coming. The Morrison, Patterson, and Jenkins families had made a deal with the slave catchers, money in exchange for information about our operations. We tried to evacuate everyone, but they surrounded the house. How did you survive to hide the evidence?" "I didn't survive," Margaret said simply. "None of us did. They murdered us all and buried our bodies in the woods behind the house. But my spirit remained, bound to this place by the injustice and the unfinished work. Arizona felt tears on her cheeks. I'm so sorry. Do not mourn for us. We died for a cause we believed in. But our sacrifice will mean nothing if these crimes continue. That is why you were guided here, Arizona. You and Sophia have the strength to complete what we could not. How can I fight people with that much power and influence? Margaret smiled, and for the first time she looked at peace. The same way we did. With courage, with truth, and with the knowledge that justice delayed is not justice denied. The evidence you found is only part of what they fear. Tomorrow, show Sophia the garden. She will know where to dig. The ghostly figure began to fade. But Margaret's final words came through clearly. Trust your instincts, trust your daughter's gifts, and remember, you are not alone in this fight. The spirits of the righteous stand with you. As Margaret disappeared completely, Arizona felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The Blackwood mansion hadn't trapped her, it had chosen her. Tomorrow she would uncover the rest of Margaret's secrets. Tonight she would plan her war against the descendants of those who had silenced the Underground Railroad. Arizona woke to the sound of Sophia's laughter drifting up from the garden. Through her bedroom window, she watched her daughter playing among the overgrown roses and wild herbs that had once been Margaret's carefully tended sanctuary. But Sophia wasn't playing alone. She was clearly responding to someone Arizona couldn't see. After breakfast, Arizona took Sophia outside, ostensibly to explore the grounds, but really to follow Margaret's cryptic instruction about digging in the garden. Miss Margaret says there's something important buried by the old oak tree, Sophia announced, skipping toward a massive tree whose gnarled roots created natural sitting spots throughout its base. Arizona followed, carrying a small spade she'd found in the garden shed. Where exactly does she want us to dig? Sophia walked straight to a spot where the earth seemed slightly depressed, as if something had been buried there long ago, and the ground had slowly settled. Here, she says it's not very deep because she was in a hurry that night. Arizona began to dig, and within minutes her spade struck something solid. She cleared away the dirt to reveal a metal strongbox, its brass fittings green with age, but still intact. The lock had long since corroded, and the lid opened with a screech of protesting hinges. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of oilcloth, were more documents, but these were different from the ones she'd found behind the cellar brick. These papers were official: property deeds, bank records, and most importantly, a detailed ledger of payments made to government officials for decades. What did you find, Mama? Arizona studied a bank record from 1902 showing large deposits into accounts belonging to the Morrison, Patterson, and Jenkins families. The amounts were staggering for the time period. Clearly payment for services that went far beyond simple information sharing. I think I found proof of how deep this corruption goes. Baby girl. But as she continued reading, Arizona realized the corruption wasn't historical. It was ongoing. Tucked between the century-old documents were photocopies of modern bank statements, property transfers, and incorporation papers. Someone had been updating Margaret's files, documenting how the same criminal networks had evolved and persisted through generations. The most recent document was a business plan dated just 6 months earlier, outlining the expansion of what was euphemistically called labor transportation services throughout the region. The signatories included names Arizona now recognized: R. Morrison, Rachel's father; P. Patterson, likely Earl Patterson's son; and D. Ross. Diana Ross wasn't just involved. She was one of the operations leaders. Arizona's phone rang, making her jump. Diana's name appeared on the caller ID. Arizona, honey, I've been worried about you. Diana's familiar voice carried the same warmth it always had, but now Arizona heard the manipulation beneath it. You haven't brought Sophia by in 2 days. Is everything all right? We're fine. Just settling into our new routine. I was hoping you might let Sophia stay with me tonight. I'm making her favorite cookies, and I thought it might give you a break." Every instinct Arizona possessed screamed danger. Diana had been positioning herself as the helpful neighbor, gaining access to Sophia and learning about their discoveries. Now she was trying to separate them. "That's sweet of you, but Sophia wants to stay home tonight. We're working on a project together." "What kind of project?" Arizona forced herself to sound casual. "Just some family research, learning about the house's history." There was a pause, and when Diana spoke again, her voice had lost some of its warmth. "You know, there are some things about that house that are better left buried, Arizona. Some histories that should stay in the past." "I'm sure you're right." After hanging up, Arizona gathered Sophia and the strongbox and headed back inside. She needed to document everything and get copies to someone she trusted before Diana and her associates realized how much she'd discovered. That afternoon, while Sophia napped, Arizona drove to the library. Joey helped her photocopy the documents and create multiple sets of evidence packets. "This is incredible," he said, reviewing a property deed from 1901 that showed the Morrison family had secretly owned several houses along the Underground Railroad route. They weren't just taking bribes, they were controlling the entire operation, and they've been doing it ever since. "Look at this modern property map." Arizona spread out a current county map, marked with locations that corresponded to the historical Underground Railroad stations. They own or control properties at every major stop, which means they can monitor who moves through the area, control the routes, and eliminate anyone who threatens their operation. Arizona nodded grimly. "Like the Blackwood Society. Like anyone else who gets too close to the truth." Joey studied a recent financial document. "According to this, they're processing dozens of people per month. The profits are enormous. We need to contact the FBI. This is federal jurisdiction." "Agreed, but we need to be careful. If these people have been corrupting local officials for over a century, they probably have connections at higher levels too." As they worked, Arizona became aware of being watched. She glanced toward the library windows and saw a black sedan parked across the street, the same car Rachel Morrison had driven to the mansion. "Joey, we're not alone." He followed her gaze and paled. "The back exit." They quickly gathered the documents and slipped out through the library's rear door, but as they reached Arizona's car, another vehicle pulled into the alley behind them. Arizona recognized the driver, Earl Patterson, the elderly man who had warned her about the mansion at the auction. "Get in the car," she told Joey, her hand shaking as she tried to insert the key, but Earl Patterson wasn't acting threatening. He got out of his truck with his hands visible and approached slowly. "Miss Harris, please." "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." Arizona kept the car between them. "Help with what?" "With stopping my son and his partners. I know what they've been doing, and I know you found evidence of their crimes. How do I know you're not working with them?" Earl's weathered face was heavy with shame. "Because my great-grandfather was one of the men who betrayed the Underground Railroad in 1903. My family has been living with that guilt for generations, and I won't let it continue." He reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "I've been documenting my son's activities for years, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them down. When I saw you buy that house, when I heard about the strange things happening there, I knew Margaret Blackwood had finally found her champion." Arizona stared at him, trying to read his intentions. "What's in the envelope?" "Financial records, correspondence with other trafficking networks, and most importantly, the location where they've been disposing of people who try to escape or cause problems." Joey stepped closer. "You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about genocide," Earl said quietly. "They've been killing vulnerable people for over a century, and they're not going to stop unless someone stops them." Arizona made a decision that went against every survival instinct she possessed. She trusted him. "Get in the car," she said. "We have a lot of work to do." As they drove back toward the mansion, Earl Patterson told them about the mass graves hidden in the woods. about the network of corruption that reached into law enforcement and government offices, and about the plan to eliminate Arizona and Sophia before they could expose the truth. They're coming tonight, he warned. They can't afford to let you live with what you know. Arizona thought about Sophia, probably just waking up from her nap. Innocent and trusting and completely dependent on her mother's ability to protect her. Then we'd better be ready for them. They returned to the mansion as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown grounds. Arizona had sent Sophia to play in her room while the adults discussed their strategy. But she could hear her daughter's voice drifting down from upstairs. Clearly in conversation with Margaret, Earl Patterson spread his documents across the dining room table, creating a timeline of corruption that spanned 5 generations. The trafficking operation never stopped, he explained. It just evolved. During Reconstruction, they moved displaced freedmen. During the Depression, they trafficked desperate families looking for work. In modern times, they target immigrants, runaways, addicts, anyone society won't miss. Joey studied a map showing body disposal sites. How many people are we talking about? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands over the decades. Arizona felt sick, and no one ever tried to stop them. People tried. Journalists, social workers, federal agents, they all met with accidents or simply disappeared. The network protects itself by eliminating threats, like they eliminated the Blackwood Society. Exactly. But this time is different. Earl looked at Arizona with something approaching hope. This time they're dealing with someone Margaret Blackwood chose. Someone with protection they can't understand or fight. Before Arizona could respond, Sophia's voice called down from upstairs. "Mama, someone's coming to visit us." Arizona went to the window and saw headlights turning into their driveway. Not just one car, but 3 vehicles moving slowly toward the house. "They're here," Earl said grimly. Joey moved toward the back door. "We should run." "No." Arizona's voice was steady, surprising herself. "We run, and they'll just come after us later. They'll never stop hunting us. This ends tonight. Arizona, these people are killers. So were the slave catchers who came from Margaret's society. But she was ready for them. She hid the evidence, preserved the truth, and waited for someone who could finish the fight. Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs, no longer the carefree child who had been playing with dolls just hours ago. Her young face was grave and determined, aged beyond her years by the weight of supernatural knowledge. "Miss Margaret says it's time," Sophia announced. "She says the house will protect us, but we have to be brave." The first car stopped in front of the house, and Arizona recognized Diana Ross behind the wheel. Rachel Morrison got out of the second vehicle, no longer bothering with her professional facade. The third car disgorged 2 men Arizona didn't recognize, hired muscle by the look of them. "Earl," Diana called toward the house. "We know you're in there. Come out and we can discuss this like civilized people." Earl moved to the front window. "There's nothing to discuss, Diana. This ends now. Your grandfather understood the necessity of our work. Your father accepted it. Why can't you?" "Because I'm not a monster." Rachel stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority she'd tried to project during her official visit. "Mr. Patterson, you're interfering with a legitimate business operation that provides essential services to our community." Arizona couldn't help herself. She opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, Sophia beside her. "Essential services? You're talking about slavery." "I'm talking about maintaining order," Rachel snapped. "Some people are meant to be free, and others are meant to serve. We simply facilitate natural hierarchies. The same natural hierarchies your ancestors believed in when they betrayed the Underground Railroad." Diana's friendly mask slipped completely. "You sanctimonious little bitch. Do you have any idea what we've built here? What we've preserved? This community has been stable and prosperous for over a century because we maintain proper control. By murdering anyone who threatens your profits. By eliminating chaos. By ensuring that inferior people don't disrupt the natural order." Diana gestured toward the hired men. "Just like we eliminated the Blackwood Society when they tried to corrupt our community with their radical ideas." Earl stepped onto the porch beside Arizona. Diana, listen to yourself. You sound exactly like the monsters our great-grandfathers were. Our great-grandfathers were visionaries. They understood that some fights never end. They just change battlefields. As if responding to some invisible signal, the temperature around the mansion began to drop. Arizona could see her breath, and frost started forming on the porch railings despite the mild October evening. Sophia stepped forward, her young voice carrying impossible authority. "Miss Margaret says you need to leave our property." "All of you," Rachel laughed harshly. "Sweetheart, your imaginary friend can't help you now." But her laughter died as the front door slammed shut behind them with tremendous force. Then every window in the mansion lit up simultaneously, not with electric lights but with an otherworldly glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "What the hell?" One of the hired men began. He was cut off as the massive oak tree in the front yard began to creak and groan. Its ancient branches swayed without any wind, and the sound of multiple voices, men, women, and children, began to echo from within the house. "The Underground Railroad Station," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "Miss Margaret called all the souls they helped to freedom. They're here to protect us." The ghostly voices grew stronger, and Arizona could make out words. Freedom, justice, no more running. Stand and fight. Diana's composure cracked completely. "This is impossible. They're all dead. We made sure they were dead." "You killed their bodies," Arizona said, understanding flooding through her. "But you couldn't kill their cause. Every person the Blackwood Society helped to freedom, every life they saved, those spirits have been waiting too." The hired men were backing toward their car, clearly having second thoughts about whatever they'd been paid to do. But Rachel and Diana seemed rooted in place, frozen by a combination of greed and disbelief. "Get in the car," one of the men called to them. "We're leaving now." "No," Diana screamed. "We control this town. We've controlled it for generations." The mansion's front door swung open on its own, and a figure in white stepped onto the porch. Not translucent now, but solid and real. Margaret Blackwood in all her living glory, her dark eyes blazing with more than a century of righteous anger. "You controlled nothing," Margaret said, her voice carrying the weight of eternity. "You perverted everything. You turned routes to freedom into paths to slavery. You corrupted sacred ground with your greed." Behind Margaret, more figures began to appear, other members of the Blackwood Society, dressed in their period clothing but radiating power and purpose. Arizona counted at least 20 people, all of them focused on the small group of traffickers with laser intensity. "This is our house," Margaret continued. "Our mission, our fight. And you are not welcome here." What happened next would have been impossible to explain in any rational terms. The ground beneath Diana's and Rachel's feet began to crack and split, as if the earth itself was rejecting their presence. The air around them shimmered with heat, while the rest of the evening remained unnaturally cold. Both women stumbled backward, terror replacing their earlier confidence. "Get them off our property," Arizona said quietly. Margaret nodded once, and every spirit on the porch raised their hands in unison. A wind rose from nowhere, growing stronger and more focused until Diana, Rachel, and their hired men were literally blown off the property, stumbling and falling as they fled toward their cars. "This isn't over." Diana screamed as she struggled to get her car started. "We know where you live." "So do we," Margaret replied, though her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "And we know where your victims are buried. We know every crime, every murder, every act of betrayal. The dead have long memories." The 3 cars peeled out of the driveway in panic, leaving Arizona, Sophia, Earl, and Joey standing on the porch, surrounded by the spirits of people who had died fighting for freedom more than a century ago. Margaret turned to Arizona, her expression gentle now. "You have done well, but this is only the beginning. They will regroup, try different tactics. The evidence you've gathered must reach the right authorities. How do we know who to trust?" "The same way we always knew, by following your conscience and protecting the innocent." Margaret knelt before Sophia. "And you, little guardian, must help your mother finish what we started." Sophia nodded solemnly. "I understand, Miss Margaret. We won't let them hurt anyone else." As the spirits began to fade back into whatever realm they'd emerged from, Margaret had one final message for Arizona. "Remember, you are not fighting them alone. Every victim they've claimed, every life they've destroyed, every act of injustice they've committed has created allies in places they cannot reach. Use that power," and then they were gone, leaving only the 4 living people and the certainty that their real battle was just beginning. The next morning brought an eerie calm to the mansion. Arizona woke expecting to find police cars, or worse, outside her door, but the driveway was empty and the phone hadn't rung. Diana and her associates seemed to have retreated, but Arizona knew it was the calm before the storm. Earl had spent the night in one of the guest rooms, and over breakfast he outlined the scope of the challenge they faced. "They won't come back with threats or hired muscle," he warned, stirring sugar into his coffee with hands that shook slightly. "They'll use the system against you. Legal challenges, child welfare investigations, maybe even frame you for something. What kind of something? Drug possession, child endangerment, mental instability, anything that discredits you and gives them legal grounds to remove Sophia from your care." Arizona's stomach clenched. "They can do that? They've been corrupting the system for over a century. They have judges, social workers, police officers, even some FBI agents on their payroll." Joey looked up from the documents he'd been organizing. "Then how do we fight them?" "We go over their heads. Federal task force level, with people who have no local connections." Earl pulled out a business card that looked like it had been carried in his wallet for years. "I have a contact at the Department of Justice. Someone I served with in Vietnam who owes me a favor. Can we trust him? With my life. The question is whether we can reach him before they neutralize the evidence." As if summoned by their conversation, Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed and carrying her school backpack. "I'm not going to school today," she announced matter-of-factly. "Sweetheart, you have to go to school. Miss Margaret says the bad people are planning to take me away from you today. She says I'll be safer here." Arizona felt her blood turn to ice. "What did she tell you exactly?" "They're going to say you're not a good mama because you let me see ghosts. They have papers that say I'm in danger, and they have people at my school who will help them take me." Earl was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling in that favor. Right now." While Earl made his contact, Arizona paced the kitchen, her mind racing through possibilities. Even if Earl's friend at Justice could help them, it would take time to organize an investigation. Time they might not have. "Mama!" Sophia took her hand, her small fingers surprisingly steady. "Miss Margaret wants to show you something important. Something that will help us win." Arizona followed her daughter upstairs to Margaret's former bedroom. The space had been preserved exactly as it was in 1903. 4-poster bed with lace canopy, a vanity table with silver brushes, and a writing desk by the window. But now there was something new. An envelope lying on the bed, sealed with red wax and addressed in Margaret's elegant handwriting, "For Arizona Harris, guardian of truth." With trembling hands, Arizona broke the seal and read the letter inside. "My dear Arizona, if you are reading this, then the final battle approaches. You have proven yourself worthy of the trust placed in you, but the hardest test still lies ahead. In the bottom drawer of my writing desk, you will find an iron key. This key opens a vault beneath the cellar floor, not the hiding place you already discovered, but a deeper chamber that contains the full truth of what we died protecting. The trafficking networks you've uncovered are only part of a larger conspiracy that stretches beyond this town, beyond this state. What you will find in the vault are the names and locations of everyone involved, from the local level to positions of national power. This information is why they were so desperate to eliminate us, and why they will stop at nothing to silence you. But you have advantages we did not. You have allies in the modern world who can act on this evidence. You have a daughter whose gift allows her to see truth through deception. And you have the protection of every soul we helped to freedom, every spirit who died fighting injustice. The key will also unlock a passage that leads from the vault to the woods beyond the property. If you must flee, this route will bring you to safety at the old Jameson farm, where Earl's cousin still lives and can be trusted. Remember, they fear exposure more than anything else. Use that fear against them, with admiration and hope. Margaret Blackwood. Arizona found the key exactly where Margaret had promised, an ornate iron skeleton key that felt warm in her palm despite the cool morning air. She hurried back downstairs to find Earl just ending his phone call. "Good news," he said. "Agent Collins is assembling a task force. He can have federal agents here by tomorrow morning." "We may not have until tomorrow morning," Arizona replied, showing him Margaret's letter. Joey read over Earl's shoulder, his face pale. "A vault beneath the cellar? With evidence of national-level corruption." "That's what she says." Arizona hefted the key. "There's only one way to find out." They descended to the cellar, bringing flashlights and a crowbar. The space looked different in daylight, filtering through the small windows. Less ominous, more like an ordinary basement. But as they moved aside boxes and furniture, they found what they were looking for, a section of stone flooring that didn't quite match the rest. The iron key fit into a lock hidden beneath a loose stone. And with some effort, they lifted a heavy trapdoor that revealed stone steps leading deeper underground. "This is it," Arizona said, starting down the stairs. "Whatever the Blackwood Society died protecting is down here." The vault was larger than she'd expected, a natural cave that had been reinforced with stone walls and equipped with shelving and filing cabinets. But what took her breath away wasn't the size of the space, but its contents. The shelves were lined with hundreds of files, photographs, and documents spanning more than a century. Not just records of local corruption, but evidence of a trafficking network that reached into every level of American society. Names she recognized from newspapers and television, photographs of people she'd never suspected. Financial records that traced money from small-town operations to major corporations. "My God," Earl whispered, examining a file marked Congressional Connections, 1995-2020. They weren't just running a local operation. They were supplying labor to industries across the country. Joey found a section devoted to law enforcement. "Look at this. They have compromised agents in the FBI, DEA, ICE, even the U.S. Marshal Service." Arizona opened a file labeled Disposal. Methods, and immediately wished she hadn't. The photographs and documents inside detailed the systematic murder of thousands of people over decades, including mass graves that had never been discovered. "This is why Margaret couldn't rest," she said quietly. "This isn't just about historical injustice. This is about ongoing genocide." As they photographed documents and gathered evidence, Arizona became aware of voices echoing from somewhere deeper in the cave system. At first, she thought it might be more supernatural manifestations. But these voices were distinctly modern. "Someone's down here," she whispered. They followed the sound through a narrow passage that opened into another chamber. This one was clearly in active use, equipped with modern lighting, ventilation, and what looked like holding cells carved into the rock walls. And the cells weren't empty. A dozen people huddled in the darkness, clearly terrified and probably drugged. Most appeared to be young adults, though it was hard to tell their exact ages in the dim light. They wore the kind of cheap, identical clothing that suggested they'd been processed through some kind of system. "Jesus Christ," Earl breathed. "They're still using this place." One of the prisoners, a young woman who looked barely 18, looked up at them with dull, hopeless eyes. "Are you here to take us somewhere else?" Arizona's heart broke. "No, sweetheart. We're here to help you. We're going to get you out of here." But as they began to examine the holding area, looking for keys or ways to open the cells, they heard footsteps echoing from the passage behind them. Multiple sets of feet moving with purpose. "They found us," Joey said unnecessarily. Arizona looked around desperately. Margaret had mentioned an escape passage, but she couldn't see it in the maze of tunnels and chambers. "Sophia," she called softly, hoping her daughter could hear her somehow. "We need Miss Margaret's help." The response came not from above, but from the walls around them. Margaret's voice echoed through the stone chambers. The passage behind the largest cell leads to freedom. Take the prisoners with you. They have waited long enough for rescue." Arizona found the hidden door Margaret had referenced, concealed behind what looked like solid rock. The iron key opened this lock as well, revealing a tunnel that sloped upward toward the surface. "Everyone out," Arizona ordered, helping the prisoners from their cells. "Follow this tunnel. Keep going until you reach daylight." Earl took charge of the evacuation, while Arizona and Joey gathered as much evidence as they could carry. The footsteps in the main passage were getting closer. "Arizona," Diana's voice echoed through the chambers. "We know you're down here. Come out and no one gets hurt, like no one got hurt in 1903? Arizona called back, still stuffing documents into her bag. The Blackwood Society got exactly what they deserved. "Just like you will if you don't surrender." Arizona looked at Joey and Earl. The prisoners were safely into the escape tunnel, but they needed more time to get clear. "You go," she told them. "I'll buy us some time." Arizona, "No. Go. Get those people to safety and get the evidence to Agent Collins. This is what Margaret chose me for." As Earl and Joey reluctantly followed the prisoners into the escape tunnel, Arizona remained in the vault, gathering the most critical documents. She could hear Diana and her associates getting closer, their flashlight beams beginning to penetrate the chamber. "Miss Margaret," she whispered, "I hope you have one more miracle in you." The temperature in the vault plummeted, and Arizona's breath came out in white puffs as the spirits of the Blackwood Society materialized around her. But they weren't alone this time. Dozens of other figures appeared as well. The souls of every person the trafficking network had murdered over the decades. "You are not alone in this fight," Margaret said, her voice filled with power and purpose. "Show them what justice looks like when the dead demand their due." Arizona took a deep breath, hefted her bag of evidence, and walked toward the main passage to meet her enemies face to face. Arizona emerged from the vault passage to find Diana, Rachel, and 3 armed men waiting for her in the cellar. Their flashlights created a circle of harsh white light that seemed to push back against the supernatural cold that had followed her from the underground chambers. "That's far enough," Diana said, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Behind her bravado, Arizona could see the terror in her eyes. Terror not of Arizona, but of what she'd witnessed upstairs when the spirits had manifested. "Far enough for what?" Arizona asked, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. "Far enough to stop you from murdering more innocent people?" Rachel stepped forward, trying to reassert her authority. "You're trespassing in a restricted area, interfering with a federal investigation." "Federal investigation." Arizona almost laughed. "Is that what you're calling it now?" "The people in those cells are dangerous criminals being held pending deportation," Rachel continued. But her voice lacked conviction. "The 18-year-old girl who asked if I was there to move her somewhere else. She's a dangerous criminal?" Diana signaled to her men, and they raised their weapons. "Enough talking. You've seen too much, and you know too much. Just like the Blackwood Society. Just like Margaret Blackwood, who spent her life fighting people exactly like you. Margaret Blackwood was a naive idealist who died for her stupidity." The temperature in the cellar dropped another 10 degrees, and Arizona saw her breath misting in the flashlight beams. "The spirits were coming. She died for her beliefs," Arizona corrected. "She died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. She died so that someday someone like me could finish what she started. Someone like you." Diana's laugh was brittle. "A broke single mother who can't even keep a job. You think you're some kind of hero. I think I'm exactly what Margaret knew I was. Someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." As if summoned by her words, the mansion's lights began to flicker overhead. Not electrical problems, but the same otherworldly glow that had illuminated the windows the night before. One of the gunmen looked nervously at the ceiling. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" He was cut off as every door in the cellar slammed shut simultaneously. The sound echoed through the space like thunder, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the stairs above, dozens of footsteps, as if a crowd of people were walking through the house. "What the hell is that?" Another gunman whispered. Arizona smiled, feeling Margaret's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. "That's justice arriving about a century late." The footsteps grew louder, and now voices joined them, singing. The melody was one Arizona recognized from history books, a spiritual that had guided escaped slaves to freedom. "Wade in the water." "Impossible," Rachel breathed. "They're all dead. We made sure they were dead." "You killed their bodies," Arizona said, echoing Margaret's earlier words. "But you can't kill righteousness. You can't murder justice. And you certainly can't silence the voices of the innocent." The singing grew stronger, joined by more voices, not just the Blackwood Society, but every person the trafficking network had murdered over the decades. The sound filled the cellar, overwhelming and beautiful and terrible in its power. Diana was backing toward the stairs, her composure completely shattered. "Shut them up! Make it stop!" But her gunmen were already fleeing, dropping their weapons as they ran for the stairs. The supernatural manifestation was beyond anything they'd been paid to handle. "You can't escape your crimes by running," Arizona called after them. Margaret made sure of that. Every victim, every murder, every act of betrayal, it's all documented. It's all preserved. It's all going to come to light. Diana turned back, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "You sanctimonious bitch! Do you have any idea what you've destroyed? Generations of work, centuries of careful planning. Planning to do what? Enslave people? Murder them? Profit from their suffering? Planning to maintain order? Planning to keep inferior people in their proper places?" Arizona felt Margaret's spirit strengthen around her, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of everyone who had ever died fighting for freedom. The only inferior people in this room are the ones who think they have the right to decide who deserves liberty and who doesn't. The singing reached a crescendo, and the cellar filled with light. Not the harsh glare of flashlights, but the warm, golden illumination of justice finally arriving. In that light, Arizona could see them clearly. Margaret and her society standing behind Arizona like an army of guardians. But they weren't alone. Behind them stood hundreds of other figures, every person the trafficking network had murdered, every victim whose death had gone unpunished, every soul who had been waiting for this moment. Rachel and Diana huddled together, overwhelmed by the supernatural display. Their modern cynicism offered no protection against the righteous anger of the dead. "It's over," Arizona said simply. "Your network is exposed, your crimes are documented. And your victims are finally going to get justice." Margaret stepped forward, visible now even to Rachel and Diana, her white dress blazing like armor in the supernatural light. "You thought you could bury the truth with our bodies," Margaret said, her voice carrying the weight of more than a century of waiting. "But truth, like justice, has a way of rising from the grave." Arizona reached into her jacket and pulled out the silver medallion she'd found among Margaret's possessions. The seal of the Blackwood Society, bearing the inscription "Truth and Freedom." As she fastened it around her neck, she felt the full weight of the legacy she was accepting. "This ends now," she said, facing Diana and Rachel. "All of it. The trafficking, the murder, the corruption, everything your families have built on the bones of innocent people." Diana's fear transformed into desperate fury. She lunged forward, pulling a small pistol from her purse. "I won't let some welfare mother destroy everything we've worked for." But as she raised the weapon, her hand began to shake uncontrollably. The gun grew too heavy to hold, too cold to touch, and she dropped it with a cry of pain. "You can't fight the dead," Margaret said, stepping between Arizona and Diana. "You can't intimidate ghosts. You can't bribe spirits. You can only face judgment." Rachel was backing toward the stairs, her professional facade completely gone. "This isn't real. Mass hallucination. Shared psychosis. There has to be a rational explanation." "The rational explanation," Arizona interrupted, "is that you've spent your entire life serving a system built on evil. And evil always pays its debts in the end." The spirits surrounding them began to move, forming a circle around Diana and Rachel. Arizona recognized some of them from the photographs she'd found, members of the Blackwood Society in their period clothing. But others were more recent victims, wearing modern clothes, their faces bearing the marks of violence and despair. "Look at them," Arizona commanded. "Look at the people your network murdered. Look at the children you trafficked, the families you destroyed, the lives you ended for profit." Diana tried to close her eyes, but found she couldn't. Some supernatural force held her gaze fixed on the faces of her victims. "We were maintaining order," she whispered. But the words sounded hollow even to her. "You were perpetuating slavery," one of the spirits replied. "A young man in modern clothing who couldn't have been older than 20 when he died. You stole my life. You stole my freedom. You stole my future." More voices joined his, creating a chorus of accusation that filled the cellar. "You murdered my family. You sold my children. You buried the truth. You silenced the witnesses." Rachel collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of generational guilt. "I was just following protocol. I was just doing my job." "So were the guards at concentration camps," Margaret replied coldly. "So were the overseers on plantations. So were the slave catchers who came for my people. Evil doesn't become acceptable just because it's systematic." Arizona felt a strange peace settling over her as she watched justice finally being served. For months, she'd been reacting to circumstances beyond her control: job loss, eviction, homelessness, supernatural encounters. But now, for the first time since buying the mansion, she was in control of her destiny. "Diana Ross," she said formally. "Rachel Morrison, I charge you with crimes against humanity. I charge you with murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy. I charge you with carrying on the work of those who betrayed the Underground Railroad. And I call upon the spirits of your victims to bear witness to these charges." The circle of spirits tightened around the two women, their faces stern but not cruel. They weren't seeking vengeance. They were demanding justice. "What do you want from us?" Diana asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The same thing Margaret wanted from your great-great-grandfathers," Arizona replied. "The truth, all of it. Every name, every location, every crime, every cover-up. You're going to confess everything, and you're going to do it to federal agents who can't be bought or intimidated. We'll be killed. The network reaches too high, includes too many powerful people. Then you should have thought of that before you chose to serve it." Margaret approached the two cowering women, her white dress trailing behind her like a banner of righteousness. "You have one choice," she said. "Confess your crimes and accept earthly justice, or face eternal judgment for the souls you've destroyed." As if to emphasize her point, the spirits of the victims pressed closer, their eyes burning with righteous anger. Rachel broke first.
"All right."
"All right. I'll tell you everything. The names, the locations, the financial networks, everything. Just make them stop looking at me." "And you?" Arizona asked Diana. Diana stared at the spirits surrounding her, at the faces of people she'd helped murder, at the evidence of decades of evil written in their expressions. Finally she nodded. "I'll confess. But you have to protect us. Once this comes out, we're dead women. You were dead women the moment you chose to perpetuate your ancestors' crimes," Margaret said. "At least now you have a chance to die with some small measure of redemption." Arizona pulled out her cell phone and dialed Earl's contact at the Department of Justice. "Agent Collins, this is Arizona Harris. I have 2 witnesses ready to confess to operating a human trafficking network spanning multiple states and involving hundreds of government officials. You're going to want to bring a very large team." As sirens began to wail in the distance, federal agents racing toward the mansion, the spirits began to fade. Their long vigil finally coming to an end, Margaret was the last to go, pausing to place a ghostly hand on Arizona's shoulder. "You have done well, Guardian. The fight continues, but today justice has won." And then she was gone, leaving Arizona standing victorious in a cellar that had seen too much suffering and would finally know peace. 6 months after the arrests, Arizona stood in the mansion's restored front garden, watching Sophia plant daffodil bulbs where Margaret had once grown healing herbs. The house looked different now. Fresh paint covered the previously peeling exterior, new shutters framed the windows, and the wraparound porch had been rebuilt to its original Victorian splendor. The reward money from exposing the trafficking network had been substantial, enough to restore the mansion completely and establish the Blackwood Foundation for Human Rights. The foundation operated from the mansion's first floor, providing legal aid and support services for trafficking survivors, while Arizona and Sophia lived comfortably in the upper floors. "Mama, do you think Miss Margaret likes what we've done with her house?" Sophia asked, patting soil around a bulb she'd just planted. "I think she's very proud," Arizona replied, settling onto the porch swing they'd installed, where Margaret used to sit and watch the road for travelers needing sanctuary. The federal investigation had exceeded even Agent Collins' expectations. Diana and Rachel's confessions had led to the arrest of over 200 people across 15 states, including 3 congressmen, 2 federal judges, and a network of state and local officials who had been facilitating human trafficking for decades. The mass graves Earl had known about were finally excavated, giving proper burial to hundreds of victims. Diana herself had survived just long enough to testify at the first round of trials before dying in protective custody, officially from a heart attack. Though Arizona suspected the weight of facing her victims' families had been too much for her conscience to bear, Rachel was serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a federal penitentiary, having provided detailed testimony about the network's operations in exchange for protection. Earl Patterson had become the Foundation's first board member, using his military connections to help identify and rescue trafficking victims. His son Paul was serving his own life sentence. The Patterson family name finally freed from the taint of their ancestors' crimes. Joey had taken a leave of absence from the library to co-author a book about the case, The Underground Railroad's Unfinished Business, which had become a bestseller and brought national attention to the ongoing fight against human trafficking. But the most important change was in Arizona herself. The desperate, frightened woman who had accidentally bought a haunted mansion had been replaced by someone who understood her purpose in life. She was no longer reacting to circumstances beyond her control. She was shaping those circumstances, building something meaningful from the tragedy she'd inherited. "Ms. Arizona?" A voice from the garden gate interrupted her thoughts. A young woman stood there nervously, clutching a small suitcase. She looked to be in her early 20s, with the haunted expression Arizona had learned to recognize in trafficking survivors. "Come in, honey," Arizona called, rising from the swing. "You must be Maria. Agent Collins told me you'd be arriving today." Maria nodded shyly, stepping through the gate that now bore a brass black reading, "Blackwood Foundation, Safe Harbor for All. Travelers." The message was deliberate, a continuation of the mansion's historic mission to provide refuge for those fleeing injustice. "Is it true this place is haunted?" Maria asked as Arizona led her up the porch steps. "Only by good spirits," Arizona replied with a smile. "Spirits who spent their lives protecting people just like you." As they entered the foyer, Arizona caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. A woman in white standing near the staircase. But when she turned to look directly, there was nothing there except a faint scent of jasmine and the warm feeling of approval that had become Margaret's signature presence. Over dinner that evening, Arizona, Sophia, Maria, and 2 other survivors the Foundation was currently housing sat around the same table where the Blackwood Society had once planned their rescue operations. The conversation was lighter now. Maria was sharing stories about her hometown in El Salvador, while the others offered advice about adjusting to life in America. "This feels like a family," one of the survivors, a young man named Carlos, observed. "A real family. That's the idea," Arizona said. Margaret Blackwood believed that freedom wasn't just about escaping bondage. It was about finding a place where you belong, where people care about your well-being. After the others had gone to bed, Arizona sat in the parlor, reviewing Foundation paperwork by lamplight. The organization was expanding rapidly, with similar safe houses being established in other states. Each one was carefully vetted to ensure it was truly committed to helping survivors rather than exploiting them. A soft sound from the piano made her look up. Not music this time, but the gentle touch of fingers on keys, barely audible, like someone testing to make sure the instrument was still in tune. "Thank you," Arizona said quietly to the empty room. "For choosing me, for trusting me, for showing me that sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the most important work." The piano fell silent, but the air seemed to shimmer near the bench, and Arizona felt the familiar presence of the woman who had changed her life. "Miss Margaret says you're welcome," Sophia announced from the doorway, wearing her pajamas and carrying her favorite stuffed animal. "What else does she say?" Sophia walked to the piano and placed her small hand on the keys. "She says the house is happy again. She says it feels like home, with people who need sanctuary and people who provide it. She says that's how it was always meant to be." Arizona joined her daughter at the piano, running her fingers over keys that had once played lullabies for escaped slaves and now played bedtime songs for modern survivors. "Will she stay with us forever?" Arizona asked. Sophia considered the question seriously. "She says she doesn't need to stay forever anymore. She says her mission is finished because we're carrying it on. But she'll visit sometimes, just to make sure we remember what we're fighting for." Arizona looked around the parlor, taking in the restored furniture, the family photographs of their extended household, the legal documents establishing the Foundation's mission. This room had seen a century of struggle, injustice, and tragedy. But now it was witnessing something Margaret Blackwood had always believed in: the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. As she tucked Sophia into bed, Arizona realized that their story was both an ending and a beginning. The Blackwood Society's mission was complete, their victims finally at rest. But the fight for human dignity and freedom would continue, carried forward by people who understood that some battles are worth inheriting, and some houses are worth haunting. Outside, the wind moved through the oak trees like whispered conversations between old friends, and the mansion settled into peaceful sleep, its walls finally holding only love, safety, and the promise of sanctuary for all who needed it.